Right, hi grade 11s. We are going to be starting with another topic. I hope you're all well and coping so far with all your work. That's not only bio, that is all your subjects. Hope it's going as well as it can at this point. We're all thinking of you and hoping that we can be back in the classroom safely very soon. But for now, this is going to continue. So we're going to start with photosynthesis today. Going to try and see how much I can fit in one video. A lot of it is going to be revision, so just work with me when I expect you to revise grade 10 work. Okay, so no, I'm lying. It wasn't grade 10 work. You actually learned about photosynthesis in grade 8. So it's going to be a revision of grade 8 work and grade 10 work because you learned about plant organs like the stem and the leaf in grade 10. So if we look at photosynthesis very quickly, we know from grade 8 that photosynthesis, we said in grade 8, it's the process by which plants make their own food. Now, in grade 11, we cannot answer a question like that. Plants don't eat food. They consume glucose to make energy. So we cannot word it like that. So we rather use the definition, the manufacturing of energy-rich carbohydrates by using chlorophyll, radiant energy, carbon dioxide, and water to produce glucose. Or it already says the manufacture of glucose in the beginning. Okay, so essentially it is the production or manufacturing of glucose which is used as energy by a plant. If you have a look at your formula is here at the bottom. You learned the formula in grade 8 already, and you learned it as carbon dioxide plus water gives me glucose and oxygen. All right. The additional thing that this formula is telling you in words here is that it requires carbon dioxide and water to make glucose and oxygen, but it will only happen in the presence of chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is sort of a catalyst in this reaction. So we don't actually write chlorophyll into the equation, but we see chlorophyll on the arrow. It's important to know that therefore there are 3 requirements of photosynthesis: carbon dioxide, water, and chlorophyll. And there are 2 products, which are glucose and oxygen. You'll see that I've circled the glucose in red because glucose is the essential product. It is the point, it is the reason why photosynthesis is happening. A plant does not undergo photosynthesis because it cares about you breathing. It does not. The tree that you look out when you stare out of your window does not think, oh, poor little grade 11 child, this child really needs oxygen to breathe, so I will undergo photosynthesis. That is not its point. Its point is to make food or make energy for itself, and in doing so, it produces waste. Its waste is oxygen. Very similarly to how when we breathe in carbon dioxide, I'm lying, listen to me. When we breathe in oxygen, we produce carbon dioxide as a waste product. In turn, the plants use that carbon dioxide, but we are definitely not breathing carbon dioxide out because we care about plants. It's just one of our reactions. Okay, so I need you to know that the point, the essential product is glucose in this situation, and you must be able to balance this reaction, which is 6CO2 plus 6H2O gives me C6H12O6, which is glucose, plus 6O2. The carbon dioxide comes from the environment, from the air. That carbon dioxide enters the leaf via stomata, and then it'll move through diffusion into the chloroplast where photosynthesis is going to occur. The water is absorbed from the soil. I don't know if you guys remember when you were in grade 8 and you wrote this in like, I think you might have had Mr. Elves even, and you wrote this in like paragraph format. The water is absorbed by the roots, and then the roots deliver the water to all the other plant organs via the xylem. It'll take place only if chlorophyll is present. Chlorophyll is found in the grana or in the thylakoids. Grana and thylakoids is the same thing. We will revise just now what I'm talking about when I talk about grana or thylakoids. And then it produces glucose and oxygen, which will leave the plant the oxygen will leave the plant via the stomata. The glucose will be stored as starch. So it'll store a starch, and it'll use up that starch as that glucose as energy, and any excess energy that it has left over will be stored as starch to be used later on. Now that's important to know that it's stored as starch, because later on we know that we test for photosynthesis by the starch test. You even did that test, I think, in grade 8. So it's important that a plant will store its energy as starch, because we're going to look for that starch when we are trying to prove whether photosynthesis happened or not. Okay, we're not looking for glucose, we're looking for starch. Starch, you should remember from last year, from learning organic compounds in grade 10, that starch is a polymer, a polysaccharide, made up of many monosaccharides. So glucose is a monosaccharide. Okay, enough of that. So this is your chloroplast. You learned about this chloroplast when you were in grade 9, and then again in grade 10 you would have sort of just revisited the idea. The chloroplast, the diagram, we don't necessarily ask it in grade 11 as strictly or as often, in any case, as what we used to when you were in grade 9 or 10, but we can ask it in a test. So it's important to sort of be able to recognize the structures. And I think some of you sometimes think that you are beyond that point and you forget to actually study your diagram. So it's important to have a look at that. If you have a look at the diagram of the chloroplast, you can see that it has a double membrane, right? So 2 layers, 2 layers that you would draw. Within that double membrane is a liquid or a gel type of solution called the stroma, which is the jelly-like substance that's keeping everything together, that houses all the enzymes and houses the structures within the chloroplast. Then you will also see starch grains. Now remembering that the chloroplast is going to be responsible for the production of glucose. And if glucose is made, it's going to be stored as starch. So we're going to find starch grains within the chloroplast. Then you've got these little like stacked coins. So these little structures here, 1, 2, 3, each one of them is called a grana. 1 grana or 1 thylakoid. It's the same thing. When I stack them up, so when I've got a whole pile of them, the stack is called a granum. Okay, so this little green maniki over here is a grana or thylakoid, but the entire stack is 1 granum. Now, these stacks are linked to one another, or the grana are linked to one another by what are called intergranal lamella, and that's just basically sort of a bridge between grana within the chloroplast. So that's basically what you've got if you're going to draw a diagram. I've given you the one that you would draw, and then another kind of version that you would see, just to be able to compare. We wouldn't easily give you one of those ugly ones in grade 11. Okay, so when we look at the chloroplast, the point is not really at this stage in grade 11 studying the diagram of the chloroplast, but rather why the chloroplast is made like it is, to be able to perform photosynthesis. So what I'm saying when I say that is we all, as humans, we have a structure, and there's a reason why we have that. We don't have structures just because. Okay, we can argue about that, like with the appendix and so on and so forth. But at one point, the appendix was an essential organ. So let's just leave that theory out here. What I'm saying is you have a liver because the liver performs a specific function. The liver can only perform that function if it has the specific structures that it needs. So in the same sense, the chloroplast has the specific structure to be able to allow photosynthesis to occur. So we need to know what those structures within the chloroplast are. And this comes up often in a question, to name the structures or the adaptations of the chloroplast that allow for photosynthesis. Okay, so first of all, and I'm not going to go back to it while I speak, but remember that we've now, in the previous slide, we saw chloroplast. So here's a chloroplast. The first thing that we know is that chloroplasts are quite flat and biconcave shaped, and that allows for them to increase surface area, or that allows for them to have a larger surface area, the fact that they're flat. An increased surface area, I want you to think, remember the chloroplast is going to absorb sunlight, so an increased surface area means more sunlight will be absorbed. Therefore, obviously sunlight, radiant energy, is one of the requirements as well for photosynthesis to occur. It's also a catalyst. And so if it has a larger surface area, it's going to have more efficient, more effective photosynthesis. While I'm there, I just want to stop. I realize that if I was in class now, I would tell a little story. So I want you to think of this. Okay, I'm going back to this little equation that we have here. Right? Here's my equation, right? I said I need carbon dioxide and I need water. But I have two catalysts. Chlorophyll is one of them. The other one is radiant energy. Okay, so I have 4 requirements actually for photosynthesis. I want you to think, lots of us during this lockdown period have baked banana bread and cookies and biscuits and cake and whatever we can get our hands on, we have baked, or your moms have, or somebody in your family has, because we are bored af. When you bake, you follow a recipe. I hope. When you cook, you don't have to follow a recipe, so luckily you can throw as much spices in as you want. But if you bake and you don't follow a recipe, your recipe will most probably flop. So we follow this recipe. When we follow the recipe, if you think of that list where they tell you what the ingredients are, so they say 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of water, 5 milliliters or 5 milliliters, teaspoon, whatever, of vanilla essence, a 1/4 cup sugar, etc. Do you ever see them ask for the oven in that list? No. You don't see them ask for the oven in that list. You see them tell you before that the oven needs to be on at a certain whatever, but they don't tell you that the oven is an ingredient, right? So in this case, you all know we can have as much flour and sugar and vanilla essence and water and all those funny things, and that's great, and we can mix them all together. But if we ain't got no oven, we ain't baking no cakes. So although the oven wasn't an ingredient, I can't make that cake without the oven. And I want you to think of the chlorophyll and the radiant energy as the oven. So although only my carbon dioxide and my water are the ingredients, I still need an oven. I need a catalyst for it to happen. And so I need chlorophyll and I need radiant energy. And without those two, photosynthesis will not occur. Okay, so there still are requirements, even though we don't find them in the formula as such. Okay, I know I deferred, but we'll go back to where we were. So we said they are flat and biconcave to increase surface area. More surface area will mean more radiant energy. So if we've just discussed how radiant energy is a requirement for photosynthesis, then more radiant energy means more photosynthesis can occur. better, more efficient photosynthesis can occur. Second of all, a adaptation that's important is to know that it has a semi-permeable membrane. This membrane, if it was not permeable at all, if it had a cell wall if we weren't permeating the cell, if we were trying to just get through the cell wall and there was no active transport, we wouldn't have carbon dioxide able to get into a chloroplast. Okay, so we have a semi-permeable membrane, which means, remember, semi-permeable means it's selectively permeable. It can allow certain substances in. So it would allow carbon dioxide to cross its membrane to enter into the chloroplast. All right, so that's important because without that, we wouldn't be able to have carbon dioxide. The third adaptation is the fact that it contains chlorophyll. If the grana, the thylakoids, did not contain chlorophyll, then we could not do photosynthesis because we know now that chlorophyll is our oven. We need it as a requirement. Without it, no photosynthesis. So that's important as an adaptation. Okay, then when we also looked, we had these grana and we had lots of them stacked on top of each other, little coins, and we said that was one granum. Now, when we have found a granum, it's allowing for more surface area. And what does more surface area do? Let's refer back here. It allows for the absorption of radiant energy. So again here, stacked grana or granum increase the surface area, which is going to allow maximum absorption of sunlight. This note over here, I've actually said already that the chlorophyll is found within the grana. The chlorophyll is responsible for trapping the radiant energy, and I said to you that grana are connected by intergranal lamella. I've also said to you, but this point here, 1, 2, 3, 4, these lines are sort of just facts. They're not adaptations. Okay, they are partly adaptations because you have to understand this information to be able to know why these are adaptations. Lastly, then, the last adaptation is that chloroplasts contain starch grains, and those starch grains are what store the glucose that has been made by photosynthesis. Why is that important? Well, we know that we're going to test for starch at the end to see if glucose was made and therefore to test if photosynthesis actually occurred. Okay, then to remind you, and I'm not going to go over this grade 11s, I will tell you, this is what I will tell you. I would not ask you this diagram to label it in a test, okay? I ain't going to ask you about spongy parenchyma and collenchyma and parenchyma and all those. I've said that already, but I'm going to ask you about xylem and phloem. That was grade 10 work. But you need to understand the basics of this leaf. So you learned this in grade 10. That's fabulous. Now you need to understand that this is the top of the leaf and this is the bottom of the leaf, okay? The bottom of the leaf has the stoma, right? Remember the stomata. So there's the openings. So carbon dioxide will enter through the stoma into the leaf, okay? Here I have palisade parenchyma and I have spongy parenchyma, and you'll remember that we learned in grade 10 that our chloroplasts, most of our chloroplasts, are found within the palisade parenchyma and the spongy parenchyma. So now think of this leaf. This is the top, okay? The radiant energy shining, if I had to draw an arrow, it would go from top towards this leaf, right? And the cuticle, we remembered, was to save water, and then it had an upper epidermis. We learned that these were transparent to allow for absorption of sunlight. Okay, we need to be able to, the radiant energy needs to be able to enter the palisade parenchyma to be able to be penetrated or absorbed by the chloroplast. Okay. That's what's the important part here. So we know that the radiant energy is entering from from the epidermis side, and it's being absorbed by the chloroplast. We know that the carbon dioxide is entering via the stomata. Okay, the water that we need as well is going to enter through the roots, but eventually it's going to be found in the xylem, and the xylem will transport it around. So that's how we get to the water. And then where's the chlorophyll that we need? Inside the chloroplast, so that there is everything that we need. Okay, so I'm really not going to go over this very well, grade 11s, because it's a lot of it I've said, and a lot of it is grade 10 work that you just have to be able to adapt. Okay, and I would have said the same exact thing had we been doing this in class. All right, so I'm just quickly going over it. I said that the epidermis has to be transparent to allow the light to be absorbed by the chloroplasts in the parenchyma. I said that the waxy cuticle will prevent water loss, desiccation. We know that the lower epidermis has stomata. The stomata will allow for gaseous exchange. In other words, carbon dioxide can enter via stomata and oxygen will leave via stomata. All right. Then, not really worried about the second bullet there, but we know that we have structures that are going to increase the surface area. We also know that it's important that remember the mesophyll, palisade mesophyll, is mostly made up of parenchyma. That is where our chloroplasts are found. I'm going to skip then. We know that the xylem is used to transport water from the roots to the leaves. We know that phloem is going to transport the food. Remember, phloem, not flow, pH, but sound for phloem, for food. So phloem will transport the food, the glucose, to the rest of the plant. So in other words, in the leaf, in the chloroplast, glucose will now be made. That glucose will move into the phloem and be transported to the areas of the plant where it is needed, and the rest will be stored within the chloroplast as starch. And then I think those are the most important parts. Again, it talks about the stomata and it talks about gaseous exchange. I've said that about carbon dioxide will be able to enter as a requirement. Oxygen will be able to leave as a product. Okay, so up to there, that was really quite a revision of grade 8 and 10 work. Then here at this slide is where the grade 11 work starts, and this is the fun. And I want to point this. It can be asked as an essay, number one, and some people really hate it when I ask it as an essay, when actually I'll tell you it's probably one of the easiest essays you can get. Okay, hold on though. Another thing is I'm not asking essays this year in grade 11. You know that we've said we took out, grade 11 has taken out essays out of the syllabus, but it can, therefore, if I'm saying it can be an essay, it can be a nice long question, okay, a proper explanation question. All right, so I say here, also remember that from here, the work is very, very important, because this is actually the grade 11 work. All right. In saying that, I am going to fit this into this video as well. I think it's, even if you guys watch this 2 or 3 times over, you can, I'd rather just put it in one video than split it up into many. At this point, I also want to say, I hope that many of you are using the download feature in YouTube so that you watch it once and spend data once on watching it, and the rest of the times you are not using your data. I hope you've saved videos. Okay, so the photosynthesis is not just as simple as I put everything in the oven and now it's great, I've baked some cake. It's got 2 phases, and each phases has requirements. Now, in total, there will still only be 4 requirements: chlorophyll, radiant energy, water, and carbon dioxide. But some of those will be used in the light phase and some of those will be used in the dark phase. Also, some products will only be made in the light phase and some products will only be made in the dark phase. So let's get into it and then you'll understand better. Oh, why? Before I move on. So we call the one phase the light phase and the other phase we call the dark phase. Please, 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 please understand. That does not mean that one happens in light and the other happens in the dark. Okay, that is not. What it does mean is that the light phase can only occur when there is radiant energy, okay, whereas the dark phase will occur regardless of the availability of radiant energy. So the light phase will only happen if there's sunlight, radiant energy. The dark phase will happen if there's light or not. Okay, that says it happens in the light and in the dark. Does that make sense? The light phase only happens when there's sunlight, radiant energy. The dark phase happens regardless of whether there is sunlight. But that does not mean it only happens when it is dark, because regardless means even if there is, it'll happen, and even if there isn't, it'll happen. So it happens in the light and in the dark. Okay. I hope that clarifies that. So as I said, light reactions will need light in order to produce ATP and NADPH. Don't worry about that too much now. And dark reactions do not need light. Okay. So the light phase. See, I'm a bit fast. Okay. So as I said, the light phase is dependent on light. And I teach this usually when I teach it in class. I would teach it exactly like I was writing an essay, and that's also because obviously up to last year we had essays every year. But I'm still going to follow this exact thing. So I would say photosynthesis happens in two phases, the light phase and the dark phase. The light phase means that this phase is dependent on light. This phase occurs in the thylakoids or grana. You don't have to say thylakoids or grana, you would just say thylakoid, or you can choose to say grana instead. Okay. It's important if you were going to write an essay or a longer question, it's important to state whether it's dependent on light or not, and it's important to know where it is occurring. Okay. So the first thing that happens in the light phase is that the radiant energy that is needed, remember it's a requirement for the light phase, is going to be trapped by the chlorophyll. So we've already spoken about this. We've said chloroplasts have grana. Inside the grana is chlorophyll, and the chlorophyll traps radiant energy. Okay, so that's the first step of the light phase. The chlorophyll is going to trap radiant energy. So if you were writing a step and perhaps while I'm teaching this, perhaps you should make a little bullet point for yourself. Chlorophyll traps radiant energy. Okay, then that's some of that energy. So there's radiant energy. As much as is absorbed, some of it. So let's say, I don't know, I want to just use a number. If all radiant energy that was trapped was 100, then 60 of it is used for one step and 40 of it is used for another step. Okay, so from that radiant energy that is absorbed, some of the radiant energy is used to split water. Now remember, water was a requirement. Okay, so if it says some energy is used to split water, it means water is a requirement for the light phase. Okay, remember water is going to travel up the xylem from the roots. So some of the radiant energy is going to be used to split water into oxygen and hydrogen ions. So remember in science, water is H2O. Okay, we know that from our formula as well. So an energy can be used to make a reaction or break a reaction, or make a compound or break a compound. So in this case, the energy is being used to break water, to split it into the oxygen and hydrogen ions. hydrogen ions are, you're going to learn a lot throughout grade 11, hydrogen ions are the thing that we are actually looking for. Remember now also, while I say that oxygen is a waste product of photosynthesis. So if you think of water being split, what did we need? Did we need water? Yes. But when water is split, we have hydrogen ions and oxygen. We know that we didn't need oxygen because we threw it away. It was a waste product. So what did we need? Hydrogen ions. Okay. So that's the first step. Some radiant energy is used to split water into hydrogen ions and oxygen. The rest of the energy is used to combine an ADP, adenosine diphosphate. Okay, here you can see in the diagram here, adenosine diphosphate. It's a little adenosine molecule. Okay, there's the adenosine with two phosphates attached to it, adenosine diphosphate. We take adenosine diphosphate and combine another phosphate, one more phosphate, to produce an adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which you know is an energy carrier. So there's 3 phosphates. Now just a little tip, okay? When we add that third phosphate, we actually go and store any energy. So ATP carries energy. The energy that it's carrying is stored between the 2 phosphates. So there. Okay. So ATP is carrying energy there between the 2 phosphates. And when we break ATP again, boom, we're going to break it into ADP. So we've got 2 phosphates and 1 phosphate loose. So in other words, when we're breaking that, we're releasing that energy that was stored. Okay. That process is called it's actually called phosphorylation, but because it's happening in the presence of light, it's called photophosphorylation. So ADP plus a P, so ADP, adenosine diphosphate plus phosphate, makes ATP, adenosine triphosphate. You don't need to be able to write the full names. ATP carries energy. When an ATP is made, that is called phosphorylation. If it is made in the presence of light, it is called photophosphorylation. Okay, so then just to go over the steps quickly. Chlorophyll will trap radiant energy. Some of that radiant energy will be used to split water into hydrogen ions and oxygen. We're not talking about the oxygen and what happens to it yet at this point. Okay, so just into hydrogen ions and oxygen. The rest of the energy will be used to combine ADP with a phosphate in order to make ATP, which is called photophosphorylation. All right. The oxygen, so now I said we're not talking about it yet, now we speak about it. The oxygen that was made is a waste product. It's not required for photosynthesis, and therefore it will be released through the stomata into the atmosphere. Okay, it's not on the slide that it goes into the atmosphere, but sometimes we ask for the fate of the oxygen. The fate is it goes out of the stomata into the atmosphere. Then the hydrogen ions that we released from the water will combine with a hydrogen carrier. Now, grade 11s, I don't want you to think about this as a hard thing. Just like ATP carries energy, NADP carries hydrogen. And it's literally a carrier. So it's not made by anything, it exists. Okay, it's not like it's not you won't find your photosynthesis reaction with an N and an A and a D and a P in it as well. Because NADP is one molecule that exists. And all it does is it's like your car. Well, not your car, but your mom's car or someone's car. Where I'm at home right now, I need to get to the shops. I get in the car takes me while I drive the car to the shop, and I do whatever I need to do, and then I get back again. It transported me. It just exists. Okay, so NADP exists. It'll bond with the hydrogen in order to carry the hydrogen over. So in other words, basically think of hydrogen as unable to move from one place to another without a carrier. So NADP comes along, it attaches to the NADPH, and it carries it to the next place where we need it. I'm going to get there now. Okay, so now what did we do in this phase? We made ATP, and we didn't make it, but we now have NADPH because we have an NADP combined to hydrogen ions. So we have two things. Okay. We actually made three because we also made oxygen, but we've already released that oxygen through the stomata. So we have two crucial items, ATP and NADPH. We need those. If we didn't need them, we would release them. So we need them. But now the light phase is done. Once we've made ATP and we have made hydrogen ions, and those hydrogen ions have a carrier, we have what we need. Light phase is complete. Those compounds now need to move into the relevant space for the dark phase to occur. So now remember I said the light phase occurs in the grana because that's where the chlorophyll is. So now we need to take ATP and NADPH and move it into where the dark phase occurs, which is in the stroma. Okay, so just looking at this diagram quickly, we have light phase, light reactions. We need light. Okay, we need light, obviously radiant energy. We said the light phase is dependent on light, so it's a requirement. We also need water. That water is split into oxygen and hydrogen ions. The oxygen is released into the atmosphere. The hydrogen ions bond with NADP to be carried. We also use some of that energy from the light phase, from the radiant energy to make ATP. So ATP and NADPH are products of the light phase that are going to be used in the dark phase. This is calling it the Kelvin cycle. For now, you just know it as dark phase. But those are requirements for the dark phase to occur. Okay, and that's all you need to know of that diagram. This is just a repetition again. Radiant energy trapped by the chlorophyll. Radiant energy is used to split water. And when it's used to split water, it splits water into hydrogen ions, which are carried by NADP. And it's also used, or it also splits water into oxygen. The oxygen is released into the atmosphere. By the way, and I didn't say this earlier, so this is important, photolysis, however you prefer to say it, says the splitting of water. Okay, so we need to know that definition. If I ask you what it means or what a word is for water being split into hydrogen and oxygen, hydrogen ions and oxygen, I'm looking for the word photolysis. Okay, additionally, also some of that energy is used to combine ADP in plus phosphate in, which is called photophosphorylation, to produce an ATP. All right, so all repetition of what I've said. The dark phase then, as I said, it's also called the Kelvin cycle from that previous diagram. But please, guys, you do not need to write that for me in a test. We don't need to know that it's also called the Kelvin cycle. That's irrelevant, all right? But the dark phase, what is important about it, that is it independent of light. It does not need light to occur. The dark phase takes place in the stroma, that's the jelly-like liquid of the chloroplast. And dark phase will happen because enzymes are helping the dark phase to happen. So we say it's controlled by enzymes. So if you have a look here, so here was my light phase. In my light phase, I made ATP and I'm carrying hydrogen, right? And they get carried into the dark phase, the Kelvin cycle. Okay, that's what we know up to now. So the first thing is that we have this ATP, and remember, ATP is carrying energy between the second and third phosphate. So the energy in that ATP will be used. Remember, we're always using energy for a reason. We're not making energy because we just think it's cool. None of you are, well, I hope not. Some of us, well, I mean, I have a reason that I've been putting on weight. I hope you guys aren't putting on a lot of weight because of lockdown, but some of us are. And see, I just lost my train of thought. This happens to, anyway. We make energy when we eat, right? So we eat, and our food is stored as energy. But then we use that energy for processes. And if we use as much energy as we made, then we don't put on weight. If we use a lot less than what we've made, then we're going to store that energy as fat. Okay, that's a lesson for digestion, and I'll get there obviously later in the year. But point is, we need to use the energy that we make. So in this case, we've now stored energy in ATP. We need to use that energy. So that energy that comes now from the light phase is going to be used to take carbon dioxide and combine it with the hydrogen ions. Not combine it with NADPH. Combine it with hydrogen. NADP is now the car. Oh, great. It took hydrogen to where it needed to be. Now it goes away again. Right. Carbon dioxide, we didn't talk about carbon dioxide at all in the previous phase, in the light phase. So now we need to know that carbon dioxide is used in the dark phase. It's a requirement of photosynthesis, but it's only required in the dark phase. So that energy from ATP is going to be used to combine carbon dioxide with hydrogen ions. And in that combination, it is going to form glucose. So think about this. What is carbon dioxide? CO2. What is hydrogen ions? H. What do I end up with if I make glucose? C6H12O6. So I've got the C and the O from carbon dioxide. I need the H to make glucose. Okay, I hope that makes sense. When I use energy, remember I said that the energy from ATP is stored between the second phosphate and the third phosphate. So now remember, if I'm going to use it, it means I'm going to slash like that ninja slashing fruit game. I'm going to slash that phosphate bond between 2 and 3 to release that energy. When I'm doing that, what am I doing? I am breaking the bond, so therefore I'm actually making a DP and a phosphate again. So you'll remember just now we learned that an ADP and a phosphate makes an ATP, and that is called photophosphorylation. Okay, I said just ignore the photo for a second. Phosphorylation is what the process is called. In this case, we take out the photo because it's not happening in the presence of light, and it's the opposite. So we call it dephosphorylation. Okay, because now we're taking ATP and making it into ADP and a phosphate. And so that is called dephosphorylation. So because I used the energy, I now have an ADP and a phosphate. I also have NADP. Remember, NADP was the little car, the little carrier that brought the hydrogen ion. But now it's sort of, it's thanks, you've served your purpose. It's like one of those boyfriends or girlfriends that, thanks, I'm done with you kind of thing. Bye, you can go now, Felicia. So NADP is going to return to the grana, and the NADP can then be used for the next round in the light phase. The ADP will also return to the grana to be used for the next round of the light phase. So we have to say that we've done what we needed to do. We made glucose. We combined the hydrogen ions with carbon dioxide. We made glucose. We've already made oxygen in the previous phase. So we've done it. We've done what we needed to do. But the ADP and the NADPH, I'm lying, NADP, not NADPH. NADP and the ADP will return to the grana because they are needed for the light phase to happen again. We then know that, just like with us, some of the glucose is going to be used for the processes of the plant, and whatever is left over will be stored as starch. So we've done up to here. We said we need NADPH and ATP for the Calvin cycle, for the dark phase. Then in the dark phase, those products are going to combine, or are going to be needed to develop carbon dioxide into glucose. So ATP energy will be used, In other words, the ATP will be dephosphorylated into ADP and a phosphate. NADPH will lose its hydrogen. The hydrogen will combine with the carbon dioxide to form glucose, which is the sugar. And thanks, NADP, I'm done with you. You can go back now. So we're going to have NADP and ADP and a phosphate that will return to the light phase. Okay, and so I don't think it's really that difficult. If we just go from the dark phase again, we know that we have NADPH that came from the light phase. We also have ATP that came from the light phase. We then also include CO2 that comes from the atmosphere. And when we do that through the process, we form glucose. Okay, the ATP, when it's used up, the energy is used up, we'll be left with ADP. ADP will return to the guarana to be used in the light phase. When NADPH has carried the hydrogen, it will be left over to return to the light phase. You can watch this video if it helps you in your own time. It might help, it might not help, use it or lose it, depending on how much data you have, obviously. Okay, so this diagram is then just a reminder of what we've learned. We've learned that in the light phase, we needed light energy, we needed water. When we had those two, we could make ATP energy through photophosphorylation, and we made hydrogen ions by splitting water. We also, when we split water, remember that was called photolysis or photolysis, we also made oxygen, but the oxygen will be released out of the stomata into the atmosphere. So what was important is that we made ATP and we carried hydrogen by NADPH into the stroma for the dark phase. Additionally, we also needed carbon dioxide for the dark phase to occur, and when we use the energy from ATP, we could then combine the hydrogen ions with the carbon dioxide to produce glucose. And that is as simple as it is, grade 11s. I am going to end it off there. We are going to talk about, in another lesson, we're going to talk about the experiments that we do to prove these things. So, do we need water for photosynthesis? Do we need light? Do we need chlorophyll? We're going to do we're not going to do the experiments. We're going to talk about how we can do experiments to test whether these are requirements or not. And how we would always do them is to say, we're going to test for starch at the end. So we'll do all our experiments and we know that, let's say, for example, water wasn't available, then technically we know that we shouldn't have starch at the end. So we're going to test for starch and we're going to know, okay, hold on, that means photosynthesis did not occur. But there are different tests that we need to do to prove carbon dioxide, to prove water, to prove chlorophyll, etc. So we'll get into detail about that. I would like first for you to be comfortable with the light phase and the dark phase and the steps. So my suggestion to you would be maybe to make a sort of flow chart for yourself or a bullet point format for yourself of the steps of the light and the dark phase, and listen to me over and over again. I know my voice is stunning, but you can make your own little bullet form because this will be a nice question in an exam. Okay, I hope that was a good lesson and that you will go and do some work and use your textbooks and play around. And I will also be sending you the PowerPoint. I want to also make sure you guys know I've actually adapted my PowerPoints. So you'll see when I send you the PowerPoint, it doesn't look exactly like this PowerPoint that I've just done with you. Although this PowerPoint contains all the information, the format is a little bit different just because the format of teaching you on a video would be slightly different to the format of teaching you in class. So I've just tried to make it a little bit more relatable for me to teach, but I will send you my original PowerPoints so that it's easier for you to study from. Have a good afternoon, morning, depending on when you watch this. And we miss you lots.